War Patrols, created by William Schmaltz. Copyright 2025. All rights reserved. This episode of War Patrols is sponsored by Flag Up Mailbox, located in Ironwood, Michigan. USS Wahoo, SS-238, 3rd War Patrol. Arrived Brisbane, Australia, December 26th, 1942, after 2nd War Patrol. On December 31st, 1942, Lieutenant Commander M.G. Kennedy was relieved as commanding officer by Lieutenant Commander Dudley Morton. Ship ready for sea, January 16th, 1943. The crew mustered on the deck of the Wahoo as Captain Morton stepped forward to speak.
What I have to say can be stated simply. Wahoo is expendable. We will take every reasonable precaution, but our mission is to sink enemy shipping. We are going out there on this war patrol to search for Japs. Every smoke trace on the horizon, every contact on watch will be investigated. If it turns out to be the enemy, we are going to hunt him down and kill him. If any man does not want to go along under these conditions, just see the yeoman so you can transfer off this ship.
No sailors asked for a transfer. Departed Brisbane, Australia. Set course for patrol area at 2-engine speed. January 17th. Made deep dive, no leaks. Upon surfacing and while starting number 2 engine for propulsion, flooded same and put it out of commission. January 18th. Exchanged recognition signals with USS Grampus. Number 2, engine back in commission. Conducted drills submerged and made frequent battle surfaces firing both 4-inch gun and 20mm guns. January 19th. Went to 3-engine speed in order to make the passage in Vitiaz Straits of New Guinea during daylight. This will give us an additional day to cover Wewak and still arrive in area as directed. The additional fuel thus used is considered to be wisely expended. January 21st. Dived on SD radar contact. Upon reaching 70 feet, stern planes jammed on hard rise.
Captain, the dive planes are jammed. They don't respond.
Causing us to broach at 30-degree up angle. Fortunately, contact was false, the PIP being an internal disturbance.
Our operation order routed us through the vicinity of Wewak. Air reconnaissance had reported considerable shipping there, and dispatches received en route indicated continued use of this area by the enemy. Unfortunately, our maps of the area lacked any useful information about the position of Wewak Harbor. Other than that, it was located somewhere near Kairiru and Mushu Islands on the northeast coast of New Guinea. As word of our navigational dilemma spread through the boat, machinist mate D.C. Keeter offered his 2-bit school atlas of the area, which he had purchased while in Australia. Using the atlas as our map, we built an accurate tracing slide, and using camera and signal light as a projector, a large-scale chart was constructed of the whole harbor. All available information was transferred from sailing directions to this chart. Study of this chart immediately showed deep water and unmistakable landmarks, with tempting possibilities for penetration and escape.
With everything in readiness, adjusted speed to arrive off Kairiru Island prior to dawn. January 24th. Dived 2.5 miles north of Kairiru Island and proceeded west to investigate Victoria Bay. As dawn was breaking, sighted a small tugboat with barge alongside, and a few moments later a Chidori-class torpedo boat. As this patrol was underway, maneuvered to avoid, then came back for a better look into this mile-deep bay. There was no other shipping. Went around southwestern tip of Kairiru Island to observe the strait between Mushu Island, which is a foul weather anchorage, saw what appeared to be tripod radio nests on the eastern end of Mushu Island, but either a patrol boat or tug in Kairiru Strait prevented further observation at this time. Proceeded west, hoping to round Une Island, connected to Karsau by a reef, and observe, from between those islands, and the mainland. Sighted object in the bight of Mushu Island, about 5 miles farther into the harbor. The bridge structure of a ship commenced approach at 3 knots. As the range closed, the aspect of the target changed from that of a tender with several small ships alongside to that of a destroyer with RO-class submarines nested. It was our intention to fire high-speed shots from about 3,000 yards, which would permit us to remain in deep water and facilitate an exit. However, on the next observation, when the generated range was 3,700 yards, our target, a Fubuki-class destroyer, was underway. Angle on the bow 10 degrees port, range 3,100 yards. Nothing else was in sight. Maneuvered for a stern tube shot. But on next observation, target had zigged left, giving us a bow tube set up. Fired spread of 3 torpedoes, range 1,800 yards, using target speed of 15 knots. Since there had been insufficient time to determine speed by tracking, observed torpedoes going aft as sound indicated 18 knots. Fired another fish with enemy speed 20 knots. The destroyer avoided by turning away, then circled to the right and headed for us. Watched him come and kept bow pointed at him. Delayed firing our 5th torpedo until the destroyer had closed to 1,200 yards. Angle on the bow, 10 degrees starboard. With our last torpedo in the forward tubes. Withheld fire until range was about 800 yards. This last torpedo clipped him amidships and broke his back. The explosion was terrific. The topside was covered with Japs on turret tops and in the rigging. Over 100 members of the crew must have been acting as lookouts. We took several pictures, and as her bow was settling fast, we went to 150 feet and commenced the 9-mile trip out of Wewak. Heard her boilers explode, while Wahoo endured shelling and a couple of aerial bombs. They were evidently trying to make us lie on the bottom until their patrol boats could return. No difficulty was experienced in piloting without observation out of Wewak, using sound bearings of beach noises on reefs and beachheads. We surfaced at 1930, well clear of Kairiru and Wallis Islands. Cleared area on 4 engines for 30 minutes. Huge fires were visible in Wewak Harbor. We wondered if they had purposely created these fires to silhouette us in case we tried to escape out of the harbor. Slowed to 1-engine speed. As the enemy convoy route from Palau to Wewak was known to pass between Wovalu and Awa Islands, commenced search by crisscrossing base course at 300 on 2-hour legs. January 25th, 0530, passed between Awa and Wuvulu Islands. Went to 2-engine speed while continuing the crisscross search for enemy shipping. (0830), fired Tommy gun across bow of small fishing boat and brought him alongside. Neither our Chamorro nor Filipino mess boy could converse with the 6 Malayans in the boat, but by sign language we learned that they were originally 9 in number, 3 having died. One of the remaining 6 was apparently blind, a second quite sick, and a third obviously suffering from scurvy. Gave them food and water as they had none, and then continued our search for the enemy. January 26th, 0700. Sighted smoke on the horizon, swung ship and commenced surface tracking. Adjusted course and speed to get ahead of the enemy. After an hour, we obtained a favorable position with masts of 2 ships just coming over the horizon, dived and commenced submerged approach. The 2 freighters were tracked at 10 knots. During the approach, determined that the best firing position would be 1,300 yards on beam of leading ship for a stern tube shot. At 10:40, fired 2 torpedoes at the leading ship, and 17 seconds later, 2 at the second freighter. The first 2 torpedoes hit their points of aim in bow and stern. The third shot passed ahead of the second target. The fourth torpedo hit him, swung left to bring bow tubes to bear in case these ships did not sink, took a periscope sweep around, and observed 3 ships close about us. Our first target listed badly to starboard and was sinking by the stern. The second ship was heading directly for us, but at slow speed, and the third was a huge transport which had evidently been beyond and behind our second target. At 10:47, the transport presented a 90-degree starboard angle on the bow at 1,800 yards range. Fired spread of 3 torpedoes from forward tubes. The second and third torpedoes hit and stopped him. We then turned our attention to the second target, which was last observed heading for us. He was still coming, yawing somewhat, and quite close. Fired 2 bow torpedoes down his throat to stop him. The second torpedo hit, but he kept coming and forced us to turn hard left, duck, and go ahead at full speed to avoid. There followed so many explosions that it was impossible to tell just what was taking place. 8 minutes later, came back to periscope depth, observed that our first target had sunk. Our second target was still going, but slowly and with evident steering trouble, and the transport was stopped, but still afloat. Headed for transport and maneuvered for a kill shot. At 11:30, fired a bow torpedo at 1,000 yards range. The torpedo wake passed directly under the middle of the ship, but the torpedo failed to explode. The transport was firing continuously at the periscope and torpedo wake with deck guns and rifles. At 11:35, fired a second torpedo with the same setup. The torpedo wake headed right for his stack. The explosion blew her midship section higher than a kite. Troops commenced jumping over the side like ants off a hot plate. Her stern went up and she headed for the bottom. Took several pictures. At 11:36, swung ship and headed for the cripple, our second target, which was now going away. Tracked her at 6 knots, but could not close her as our battery was getting low. At 11:55, sighted tops of a 4th ship to the right of the cripple. Her thick masts in line had the appearance of a light cruiser's tops. Kept heading for these ships, hoping that the last one sighted would attempt to pick up survivors of the transport. When the range was about 10,000 yards, however, she turned right and joined the cripple, her masts, bridge structure, and engines aft, identifying her as a tanker. Decided to let these 2 ships get over the horizon while we surfaced to charge batteries and destroy the estimated 20 troop boats now in the water. At 13:15, made battle surface and manned all guns. Fired 4-inch gun at largest scow, loaded with troops. Although all troops in this boat apparently jumped in the water, our fire was returned by small caliber machine guns. We then opened fire with everything we had, killing hundreds and hundreds of men in the water. Set course at flank speed to overtake the cripple and the tanker. At 15:30, sighted smoke of the fleeing ships. changed course to intercept, closed until the mast tops of both ships were in sight, maneuvered to get ahead undetected, but kept mastheads in sight continuously by utilizing number 1 periscope and locating lookout on top of periscope shears. At 17:21, a half hour before sunset, with the 2 ships' masts in line, dived and commenced submerged approach. Target zigs necessitated very high submerged speeds to close the range. Decided to attack the tanker first, as she was yet undamaged. At 18:29, when it was too dark to take a periscope range, fired a spread of 3 bow torpedoes with range 2,300 yards. One hit was observed and heard 1 minute, 22 seconds after firing. This apparently stopped him. Started swing for stern tube shot on the freighter, but he had turned away. Surfaced 12 minutes after firing and went after the freighter. Was surprised to see the tanker we had just hit still going and on the freighter's quarter. We were most fortunate to have a dark night with moonrise, not until 21:30, and to have targets that persisted in staying together. Our only handicap was having only 4 torpedoes left, and they were in the stern tubes. Made numerous approaches on the tanker first, as he was not firing at us. After an hour and a half, was able to diagnose their tactics. Closed in on tanker from directly astern. When they zigged to the right, we held our course and speed. When they zigged back to the left, we were on parallel course at about 2,000 yards range. Converged on the tanker's port beam, then twisted left with full rudder and power. He thus gave us a stern tube shot, range 1,850 yards. At 20:25, fired 2 torpedoes at the tanker, the second hitting him just abaft of his midships, breaking his back. He went down in the middle almost instantly. Immediately after firing, changed course to head for the freighter and went ahead full. Passed the tanker at 1,200 yards by SJ radar. He occupies the full field of view in the binoculars. This fixes his length at about 500 feet. Only the bow section was afloat, and its mast canted over when we left him astern. At 20:36, 11 minutes after firing on the tanker, commenced approach on our last target. It was quite evident that this freighter had a good crew aboard. They did not miss an opportunity to upset our approach by zigs, and kept up incessant gunfire to keep us away. Much of this firing was at random, but at 20:43, they got our range, placed a shell directly in front of us, which ricocheted over our heads and forced us to dive. Our gun club could take a lesson from their powder manufacturers. It was truly flashless, a glow about the intensity of a dimmed flashlight being the only indication that a projectile was on its way. It is somewhat disconcerting when a splash is the first indication you are being fired upon. We tracked the freighter by sound until the noise of shell splashes let up, then surfaced 15 minutes after diving, and went after him. 2 minutes later, a large searchlight commenced sweeping on our port bow, its rays just clearing our periscope shears. Assumed this was from a man-of-war and that the freighter would close it for protection. Our attack had to be completed in a hurry, headed for the searchlight beam, and was most fortunate to have the freighter follow suit. At 21:10, the range was 2,900 yards by radar, twisted left for a stern shot, stopped and steadied. 3 minutes later by radar tracking, fired our last 2 torpedoes without spread. They both hit, the explosions even jarring us on the bridge. As the belated escort was now coming over the horizon, silhouetting the freighter in her searchlight, we headed away to the east, and then to the north. 15 minutes after firing, the freighter sank, leaving only the destroyer's searchlight sweeping a clear horizon. It had required 4 hits from 3 separate attacks to sink this ship. Set course for Fies Island. January 27th, 0700. Sighted smoke over the horizon, commenced tracking, and changed course to intercept. At 0800, masts of 3 ships were in sight, dived, and continued approach. The whole convoy, zigging simultaneously 30 degrees either side of base course. At 0830, the tops and stacks of 2 more freighters and those of a tanker with engines aft were in sight. It was first our intention to intercept one of the lagging freighters, which did not appear to be armed, but a zig placed the tanker closest to us, surfaced with range about 12,000 yards, and headed at full speed to cut him off. Trained 4-inch gun sharp on starboard bow. The convoy sighted us in about 10 minutes, commenced smoking like a Winton, and headed for a rain squall. Only 2 of the larger freighters opened fire, and their splashes were several thousand yards short. Their maneuver left the tanker trailing just where we wanted him. At 1000, when we had closed to 7,000 yards, a single mast poked out from behind one of the smaller freighters, revealing the upper works of a corvette or destroyer. Turned tail at full power to draw the escort as far as possible away from the convoy in case we were forced to dive, as this would greatly shorten the time he could remain behind to work us over. Ordered contact report to be sent out, but could not raise anyone. Found that our engineers could add close to another knot to our speed when they know we are being pursued. We actually made about 20 knots, opening the range to 13 or 14,000 yards in the first 20 minutes of the chase. In fact, he was smoking so profusely that we called him an antiquated coal-burning corvette. He was just lighting off more boilers, evidently, for 17 minutes later, he changed our tune by boiling over the horizon, swinging left, and letting fly a broadside at estimated range of 7,000 yards. There was no doubt about his identity then, especially when the salvo whistled over our heads, the splashes landing about 500 yards directly ahead. Dived, and as we passed periscope depth, felt gun splashes directly overhead, went to 300 feet and received 6 depth charges 15 minutes later. They sounded loud, but did no damage. Lost sound contact at 11:20. As the escort had some 40 miles to catch up with his leading ships, he evidently didn't stay around. We decided to catch our breath nonetheless, so stayed deep until 1400, when we surfaced. January 28th. Sighted face, island, 15 miles ahead. Dived 20 minutes later on 10-mile circle and closed the island at 4 knots. Proceeded around southwestern end of the island 1.5 miles from the beach and located the phosphorite works, warehouses, and refinery of the northwest side of the island. Immediately made plans to shell these works that evening at moonrise with our few remaining 4-inch rounds. The large refinery and warehouses were splendid targets. This plan was frustrated by the arrival of an inter-island steamer with efficient-looking gun mounts forward and aft. She was similar to the sketch of the Q boat, appearing in the Gudgeon's second patrol report, except that she was half again as long. She swung and moored to the buoy off the refinery point, where she would have made a nice target for 1 torpedo. Her tonnage is estimated at 2,000. The phosphorite is evidently loaded from the crane and transferred to the steamers. At 1600, decided to leave well enough alone, so after taking several more photographs, set course for Pearl on 3-engine speed. The health of the crew for this patrol can only be classified as fair. In addition to the injuries, there were a few cases of boils and numerous cases of colds. The latter can be attributed to the sudden changes of air conditions we were compelled to go through during the actions. The crew had been under considerable strain for about 3 days, and their resistance had been definitely lowered. Several injuries were also sustained. One man received a severe laceration of the right forearm which required 7 stitches. 2 men were injured by a misfire of the 20-millimeter gun. In one of these cases, It was necessary to amputate 2 toes of the right foot. Due to a shortage of surgical instruments, a pair of sterilized tin snips were used to cut portions of shattered bone. Because of the phalanges in the second toe being completely shattered, it was not sutured closed, but left open to allow free drainage. A generous amount of sulfanilamide powder was used. The other man was wounded in the shoulder, but no lead or foreign body could be located. 3 sutures were used in closing the laceration. This man was back to duty in 3 days with no complications. The fire control party of this ship was completely reorganized prior to and during this patrol. The executive officer, Lieutenant Richard O'Kane, is the co-approach officer. He made all observations through the periscope and fired all torpedoes. The commanding officer studies the various setups, analyzing the TDC, and does the conning. A third officer assists the commanding officer in analyzing the problem by studying the plot and the data sheets. On the surface, the executive officer mans the TDC, makes observations, and does the firing. The commanding officer cons. This relieves the commanding officer of a lot of strain, and it gives excellent training to all hands, especially the executive officer. It is recommended that other ships give it consideration and thought. The conduct and discipline of the officers and men of this ship while under fire was superb. They enjoyed nothing better than a good fight. I commend them all for a job well done, especially Lieutenant Richard O'Kane, the executive officer, who is cool and deliberate under fire. O'Kane is the fightingest naval officer I have ever seen and is worthy of the highest of praise. I commend Lieutenant O'Kane for being an inspiration to the ship. Steamed a total of 6,400 miles on this war patrol. Expended 92,000 gallons of fuel oil with an efficiency of 14 gallons per mile. February 7th, arrived Pearl Harbor. End of Third War Patrol.